We finally got this guy up to 91, 92. Let's do a T-17 A-bomb on him. We're still in a relatively budget setup. Around 15 divs invested. 15 to 20, maybe. But he's been so smooth. Very pleased with the build. We'll ignore these shrines so that there's no complaints about shrining in a showcase. That playstyle is cast tornado shot. And then if you can't cast tornado shot, cast flame dash. We do have Wreathed in Light. Graphs are pretty strong on the build. So Wreathed in Light gives us lucky damage, and obviously Alberon's has a very high range roll on it. So if you can stand inside your Radiant Ground, it's huge damage. And then we're getting over 100% spell damage out of both of our graphs, which of course equates to 150% attack damage. Not too bad. Always kill the Dodu totems. Can't trust him. Don't forget, Wreathed in Light is a circle, so you can kind of zoom around it. Feeling very tanky. Damage is solid. A bomb clear. Very, very solid entry-level strength stacker. Let's go take a look at the POB. Now for the POB, we have this broken up into a pre-mapping, so even before you get into mapping, we can go ahead and get the build online around level 60. Mid-budget, which is the in-game character that we saw in the video. High budget, which is a lot of currency spent on the build. Max budget, which is all of the currency spent on the build. So pre-mapping, we'll go over items first. I mean, you need a Widow Hail, you need a Spine Hail, you need a helmet with resistances, life, and strength, you need an Iron Fortress, you need gloves with resistances, life, and strength on it, you need replica Alberons, you need an Astramentus, you need 2 rings with resistances, preferably amethyst rings, life, and surprisingly enough strength. You need a Foulworn Meganoid's Girdle, you need flasks, you need a couple of graphs, ideally glowing silhouette for shock, and Eshgraft for shock and damage with hits while is lucky. And then finally a jewel to kind of fill in any missing resistances or additional strength, etc. that you need on the build. So items are pretty straightforward on the build. Once you step up into the mid-budget version of the build, we'll be switching over to Crown of Eyes. The rest of the gear is mostly the same, although you may have better pieces of gear in the mid-budget version of the build. We're going to add in jewels like a cluster jewel, split personalities, better crimson jewels, etc., etc. Notably, a Watcher's Eye with life per enemy hit while affected by vitality is absolutely critical for recovery, and a good lethal pride. To get the lethal pride, make sure you always come over here, hit Find Timeless Jewel. Everything is already set in here. Hit search and then select from the list. You can copy this whole section right here and dump it in. The ones at the top are obviously better than the ones at the bottom, but your budget may vary. Now, this character I put together in-game for about 15 divs crafted. Your amount could vary depending on where you are in the league. If you're watching this video 3 weeks from now, it's probably going to be 100 div. If you're watching it at league start in another league, then it could be 10 div. You never know. But we put this together for about 15 divs. The split personalities are dirt cheap. The Watcher's Eye was probably 1 or 2 divs. The Lethal Pride was 1 or 2 divs. The Iron Fortress was 1 div, I think. Everything else was cheap or very easily crafted. You can see we're only crafting 3 things on the build, although you could craft regular jewels as well. The gloves are going to be crafted. You can do small essences to resistances, and then beastcraft suffixes cannot be changed. Harvest reforged life. Rings are, I bought a couple of really cheap fractures that are kind of mid rolls on life, and then deafening rage until we hit res on the back. Very straightforward there. And your large cluster jewel here, I purchased a cheap off meta jewel that had strength and life on it and increased effect for like 2 divs. You can craft this as well. You're going to buy a spell damage jewel, which is ideal, or a bow damage jewel with 11 or 12 passives on it. You can even go down to 9 passives if you needed to, because we don't use 3 of the passives in the in-game version of the build on each jewel. But you want a high number of passives, spell damage ideally, bow damage secondary, attack damage tertiary, and you're going to harvest reforge life until you hit increased effect and or strength, and then you're going to exalt a null, digging for 3 mods. The 4th mod we have int on here is worthless. Ideally you would want all attributes, but just getting a 3 mod is fantastic. A 25% increased effect instead of a 35% is very, very strong, because there's not a huge difference in variance on the stats for that. And so if you get a 25% with 8 strength and some life on it, that would be fine as well. Now for the high budget version of the build, it's a similar setup, but we're looking at corrupted gear on all of our unique pieces with good corruptions. We're going to craft a Warlord's Cogwork ring, and then we're going to mirror it or craft a second Warlord's Cogwork ring so that we can use Bound by Destiny. We do not need a Storm Shroud in this version of the build. We are running Purity of Elements in the low, mid, and high. Watcher's Eye, again, Vitality, but ideally with Chaos Resistance while effective with Purity of Elements, and a Light of Meaning with Chaos Resistance to help us cap out our Chaos Res in the high budget. And then in the max budget version of the build, we're just kind of pushing the limit of everything. It's a Mirrored Simplex Amulet, Perfect Gloves, Perfect Helical Ring, Warlord Hunter for Despair with Whispers of Doom on the amulet to take advantage of that. We have Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh with Aspect of Carnage for that 40% more damage. Storm Shroud tied to a Mage Blood so that we're ailment immune, so we can switch over to D-Term so we can have more armor and have more defenses. And ultimately getting somewhere between 150 and 200 mil damage out of the build on the highest budget of the build. Now, as far as skills go, there's not a difference really between the skills in each budget. You're going to be using a Tornado Shot for your damage. You're going to be using a 6-link Mana Forged Arrows for Ensnaring Arrows, Frenzy, and Wither. You're going to be running Sniper's Mark on hit, Flame Dash for mobility. You're going to be running Herald of Purity, Flesh and Stone, and either Purity of Elements or D-Term, Mortal Call, cast when damage taken, Vitality for triggering our Watcher's Eye, and then obviously Despair on a ring if we have Despair on a ring. You do have one empty socket here. You can use that for anything you would like. Portal is a great option right here for that empty socket. High budget, everything is the same. And then max budget, the only difference is flipping over to D-Term and adding in Arctic Armor for defenses as we get a better Enlightened gem in our higher budgets. Or our passive tree. Our passive tree is going to be a standard Strength Stackers tree, which is start on Marauder, grab Heart of the Warrior, and then just work your way around the tree. Make sure you do not connect at these 2 nodes. Come across, come down and around here. We do this thing right here so that we can maximize the number of nodes that we have access to on our Lethal Pride. And then because we are a bow build, we're taking advantage of proj speed. We are going to go ahead and take Bow Mastery here and get increases and reductions to projectile speed. Also applied to damage with bows. This is important for our graphs. As you get into the higher budget of the build, we have access to these unstable corrupted graphs, which gives us 1% increased proj speed per 20 strength. So we end up with 240% proj speed, which is 240% increased damage. Very, very strong nodes. We use a Zoth graph for defensive Heart of the Flame and a Storming Esh graph for the ability to get shocks on our enemies, and shocking is very important. And so that's how we're going to set up. You'll do shocks and lucky damage. So these graphs are very important in the high and max budget. In the early budget, we are taking advantage of increases and reductions to projectile speed applied to bows, but we're only getting some increased projectile speed from very, very limited places. So I guess technically speaking, in the mid budget, it's still 3.6%. That's fine. It's still a reasonable amount of damage. Now, on our passive tree, do note we have two locations right here and here that we use for cluster jewels. You could use here as well, but this doesn't do anything for us. This is a little bit of armor, and this is obviously a little bit of evasion rating, which also does nothing for us. But putting this cluster jewel down here allows us to take full advantage of all two split personalities by taking this long drawn out path to get down and over here. And so that's how we're going to set up our items, our passive trees, and our skills. Playstyle on the build, as you saw, is pretty straightforward, but if you have any questions or anything, come by Twitch, come by YouTube, ask questions. I'm happy to answer them. Thank y'all very much for watching. Y'all have a wonderful day. Peace.